It has been a while since I have been on this side of the camera and the tech and the stage and everything. It's been a really fun year, and actually, this is kind of an interesting morning because now we're actually live for the first time, actually live streaming what's happening in person. That's kind of what we've been working on for moving towards for the last 18 months. And there's so many really cool moving pieces involved in just a really wild year. New skills are being trained for people, new volunteer positions, lots of time, lots of passion, lots of effort. But I'm excited to share with you this morning because we are in a series on mental health. This September, this fall, we really just discerned and deemed that, you know what, this has been a wild year. It has been so full of so many things, right? I mean, every social divisive issue you can imagine has resurfaced, has been spoken louder. We are in our fourth wave of who knows how many more to come. I don't know, of the ongoing pandemic. We're still facing new different things coming on, but at least we can gather together. It's really exciting. Everything seems loud right now. Opinions are loud. The news is loud. Newspapers are loud. My friends are loud. My parents are loud, right? It's just, everything is loud. So no wonder, more than ever, we need to focus on our mental health because we're meant to be healthy and in relationship and focusing on gospel stuff, body, mind, and spirit. And mind is the part of that we want to deal with. And we want to take a look at how the gospel can be a guide for mental health in that time. So we are going to go into the Old Testament this morning, into the 10 Commandments. 10 Commandments. Kind of a old Charleston Heston movie you may have seen. I never even saw that. Who here has seen that movie, actually? I saw the cartoon version of it. Few people have seen it. Yeah, I think VeggieTales did a version of it too, so you got some vegetables. 10 Commandments. For those of you out there who might not even know what I am referring to here, 10 Commandments, you might have heard a few things. What are the common ones? Like, what's the first thing that comes to your mind for one of the 10 Commandments? Thou shalt not steal, murder. It's an easy-ish one to keep. Yeah, a lot of them. So the 10. But what it really was thousands of years ago, God empowered a man named Moses to guide the Israelite people out of Egypt, out of slavery. And then while they were wandering through the desert, God desired to grow closer in relationship with his people. He wanted to just impact their lives. He wanted them to be more connected to him. And so through all of that, there's a lot of back and forth. There was, it kind of came out of him giving some guidance for life, how they need to treat each other, how they need to just live, and what God's expectations were for them. And a big summary of all that comes in the form of the 10 Commandments. It's in the book of Exodus in the Bible, second book. And chapter 20 is where we kind of get that. So we're going to start right from the top. We got 10 Commandments, and God spoke all of these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. There's that story. Number 1, you shall have no other gods before me. Different translations change the order of the words. Fair enough order. He's saying, I did all of this for you. You've seen me at power. You've seen me massively involved in your life. So put me first. Make me important in your life. Don't worship these other gods, these other nations that have their own gods and things that they talk about, these invisible spiritual beings. Don't do that. So there's kind of the first one. And then verse 4, you shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. Okay, this is actually commandment number 1. That's kind of how most people see it, all these kind of together. John Mark Comer, a pastor and author, writes in his book, God Has a Name, this very interesting statement. Most people collapse the first 2 commandments into one and lump together idols and gods. And that makes sense because there is a strong link between idols and gods, especially in the way we think about and talk about them, the way we treat them, and the way they affect us. And this is especially true if you have a monotheistic, like you kind of believe there's only one God, one true God, so everything else is just kind of fake. It's fairy tales, it's fiction. Or if you have an atheistic view, there's nothing. So it doesn't matter. Idols, gods, it doesn't matter at all. But if we were to take a look at the old translation of it, we should have 11 commandments. Really, it just doesn't seem as easy, right? 10 commandments, like we've known that, we've grown up with that. But if you were to split these two, you'd have 11 commandments. And they are distinct. They are different. Gods, like this isn't just repetition for the sake of repetition in the Bible. He was trying to keep it on a stone tablet, so there's not much room for repetition to be pointless. No gods being, other nations had invisible spiritual beings that they worshiped, that had powers, that affected the world. Idols, now here's the thing. So you got one there, no gods before me. And idols, key part here is you shall not make for yourself an image And what is key about this is make. It's something that we actually manifest, we kind of come up with. It's something that we say, I'm going to give this thing value. And idols seem like this old ancient idea, right? Make a golden calf or a golden dog or something like that, and you start worshiping and praying to it. But that's actually not the point. It's actually something that we just decide is now valuable, that we now say this thing is going to be a representation, whether you just call it just luck or whatever it is. You actually decide it's going to be this chair is now the focal point of your life. And what they're present in our lives too. For a while, we talked about, I remember when I was growing up, I would hear lots of like youth talks and really videos with graphics and stuff that like brand names were idols of our day. That was what I grew up with, was like making Nike an idol in my life. And frankly, I actually was kind of susceptible to that. When I was in high school, especially the first few years, I became a bit of a brand snob. When I got my first guitar, it was an Epiphone, which is the brand Gibson, and I was like, yeah, that's the only brand that knows how to make guitars. The other competitors, Fender, sucks, don't even talk about them. I became kind of snobby about that. I got my first mountain bike, and it was a Kona, and I was like, yeah, this is the best brand ever, and that was a mistake. I've grown up since then. Cars, too, I became huge about, like, whatever. I would, like, build an allegiance to it, and often that's what ends up happening. You, like, get involved in this movement, and you start making it, like, your brand, your identity, and it becomes, like, a point of allegiance. And even more interestingly, most of the times when we have stuff that our world kind of idolizes, it becomes a polarizing thing. So, there's always, again, with guitars, there's like Fender and Gibson. With whatever it is, Coke, Pepsi, right? Who's Coke here? Who's Pepsi? Coke? Yeah, Diet Coke. I know that, Rob. Yeah, so there's always divisive things. But why this affects us, so what does this have to do with mental health, is because of this key part here I want to talk about is bow down and worship them. That's what we want to focus in on this morning, is worship is a huge part of our mental health, because worship is a really common human experience. Simply described, worship is giving something value, just treating something like it's very valuable, like it's worthy of awe, it's worthy of praise, it's worthy of talking about, like it's the most important thing in your life. And simply put, what we worship demands our attention, it drives our emotions, and it consumes our minds. We fill our minds with the stuff that we worship. And what I want to suggest to you is it's not even stuff like a brand name or a car as much in our lives anymore. We worship ideas in our head. We worship opinions or movements or theories that we come up with now, because, again, going back to that previous point, stuff that we kind of manifest and make leaves it fairly wide and open, and we start worshiping that. Old school sci-fi author Kurt Vonnegut wrote in a book, what separates humans from all other animals in the world here on this planet is that humans figured out how to have opinions about stuff. We got so passionate about these opinions and ideas that we created world currencies based on how we thought about little pieces of paper. Money, right? Or we even started drawing invisible lines between the trees and started fighting wars over it, and there became bloodshed because of our ideas about stuff. So that's what he was suggesting, but we actually can make powerful movements that affect us physically, personally, mentally, just based on our thoughts and ideas. So now you might be saying, well, okay, well, I'm just a very opinionated person. I have my thought about what's good and bad about everything, but that doesn't make it an idol in my life. That's good. We're going to talk about that this morning. So I have 3 things that I think is important to look at for when something becomes just an opinion or an idea about something and actually becomes an idol in your life. And we're going to look at this, each point, in the same kind of light of how the Bible describes people worshiping God as well. So the first one is quantity. How common, how often does something come up in your life? How prolific is it? Like if you were to make a pie graph of what you think about, what you talk about, what you focus on, how important are the different sections and stuff in your life? When I was in the outdoor leadership hiking program, they had this pie chart, and I can't actually remember there's a division. There's about 5 different sections as if you were a guide taking care of people out in the mountains that you had to like focus on. And one of the slices I remember though very much was the me slice. And a goal of being a professional guide is make that as small as possible, because you have other people and factors and wildlife and dangers to focus on. So if you make that me slice smaller, you have more room to focus on other people. But we'd always make jokes around all the time. Somebody was cold and whiny and their boots got wet and their Gore-Tex jacket failed or whatever happened. They dropped their backpack in the water. We'd just say, oh, your me slice is getting pretty big there, isn't it? Because that's all they could focus on. The old adage used to be you could tell what is important to somebody by taking a look at their credit card statement, their bank statement, because that's what they're spending their money on. That's what they're spending their time in. Is it just lots of drinks, recreation? Is it going out to movies all the time? Are they saving money for something? Are they investing somewhere? Are they supporting causes? That's a good way to kind of see it. But I actually think we have a different measure now these days of what is important, what's common in our lives. And that's social media feeds. And mostly because we have these massive companies out there that are, I mean, you've probably heard the things, but they're literally listening to us. They're listening to me right now. We're streaming. They know all the words I'm saying. They actually translate it into different languages, which is kind of a really cool feature. Lots of good stuff. But because of that, every single phone and device and the Alexa in your home, stuff like that, they're literally listening to what you're talking about, what you're asking about. And you can see that information. I won't go into it here, but it's kind of neat. You can see what they've compiled of you, and they give you what they call like a commerce profile of how they're going to market to you because they know what's important to you. And it's a pretty sobering reality when you take a look at that because they're like, you search this up all the time. You spend way more time looking at these pictures than these pictures. Google knows that. You say these things into your phone. You type these kind of stuff. Your apps are focused on this. So you actually have this whole thing, this whole feed that now gives you exactly what you think is important. And even more so, I think that this is where there's actually a big shift, especially over specifically last year. I found this stat just the other day that it's moved from buying stuff to actually ideas and movements. And now Facebook will actually target way more ads that talk about a political idea or a philosophical movement that's tied with a product. They find conservative people like this stuff way more, and they actually group you together, and progressive people might really want this, and liberal and whatever, red state, blue state, and they actually start linking that as more opinions than it is stuff. They're not trying to sell Coke so much anymore. They're trying to continue saying, you find this the most important thing ever, your opinion about something. So how prolific is it? What does your Facebook feed literally look like? What does your Instagram page literally look like? What is common? Because I'm on Facebook. I have a lot of you on Facebook. I know what is now important for people. And how often is it God, the commandment saying, put me first? What are you putting me as the most important constant thing in my life? Jesus, is your relationship with Jesus the more common thing of worship in your life, or is it actually all these other stuff you're talking about and thinking about and fighting about? Second point is priority. How quickly does it come up, your response? Is it number one? So quantity, actually what I meant to mention is the book of Psalms in the Bible, huge book, and actually the most referenced book throughout the Bible by additional authors and people. It's a book of praise, and so the language of praise is prolific throughout the Bible. Number two is priority. Every single epistle that the Apostle Paul wrote, that's most of the books in the New Testament, starts off with praise and worship of God, saying, God is so amazing, I can't believe he put me in this place to talk to you now, church. It's literally how he starts off all the time. First thing he goes to. How quick does praise of God come up in your life versus something else? Good old joke, maybe not as common anymore, but how do you know if somebody does CrossFit, if they're really passionate about it? They'll tell you, first thing. They're like, hi, my name is, actually, wait a sec, I do CrossFit, and my name's Greg, right? So then they go into it. That's pretty common. You get passionate about something, and then that's how you want people to identify you. This is like my core piece. This is my dietary guide of life. This is like how I do things. I drive a Nissan. I play a Gibson guitar. It becomes your first and only priority. And it becomes a priority too, especially when you have difficult kind of divisive driving things, when you're stressed out, when you're like focused or frustrated on something. I had an argument with a friend one time where it was several years ago, talking about something environmentally related that affected people around in developing nations. Can't remember the specifics of it. We won't go into that. But there's an interesting line that came out and stuck with me where essentially this friend was very black and white, and I saw this issue was difficult because it felt pretty gray when you start reading of some of the Bible stuff about it. I was like, man, this is, here's the important thing, but then there's the people, and then there's this whole thing. And I said, you know what? Well, let's take a look at the Bible, and, it says this, which makes it all of a sudden really tough. And then I got in trouble and said, Grant, okay, I get you're a pastor, so you're always on, but I need to go with my gut on this one. And that triggered the red flag for me. I thought, whoa, okay, I could see myself doing that all the time too. Just on this one, maybe I seemed a little bit more holy and I got the Bible quote. But so many times I'm like, God, I get that you've got an idea here, but I'm going to go with me on this one. I feel strongly this way, so, that's fine. It's not my priority. I'm not taking God as the main focus and priority in my life. So we got quantity, priority, and reaction. How do you react when ideas, thoughts, opinions, movements, whatever's the stuff in your head are taken away from you? How do you react when I knew someone who boycotted this entire restaurant chain because they changed the way they made his favorite sandwich. And it's been like decades, and like will not go, no, they used to do the club this way, and they put the thing underneath now, and the mayonnaise is different. And they'll never go there again. Have you ever boycotted something for that? Right? We're all a little petty sometimes. That's fair. But then I wonder, are we boycotting stuff because it gets in the way of us and our relationship with Jesus, or do we make exceptions? Because I know in my life I make quite a few exceptions. I think we're actually pretty good at making exceptions for stuff when it involves God, because that can kind of be kept in our back pocket and silent a little bit more. But if it's like our favorite sandwich, right, that's real, and you're holding it and you're eating it. How do we react to stuff? How do we react when our sports team loses? We have made an embarrassment of ourselves before here locally. We've rioted about stuff. That happens regular because you become so invested in what your sports team is doing. When politics don't go your way, how do you react to that stuff? How do you react when an idea that you think is the most important thing in the world isn't going the way you want it, and do you just explode about that? Now compare that to how you react about God in your life, about Jesus, about sin, about the travesties that happen, about the things blasphemed against God. How do you react? So now we're seeing that we've actually made idols based on some of these measures of some other ideas and put that in front of God, and we aren't actually giving God that same kind of place. So now there's that commandment that we're actually breaking. We need to have God in that place first and foremost. And this isn't meant to just be crushing and guilting, because it is super easy to let our minds fill up with this stuff, especially when we are when we're stressed or tired or overwhelmed, when we're lost, lonely, or desperate, looking for something awesome to look to worship. That's what worship is something that's awful, not awful, but like awe-worthy. Here is a really fun story. My father-in-law has this quirk. I hope he's watching this. It's a quirk that I thought was, when I first met him, I was like, oh boy, okay, yeah, there's a dad thing. But really cool, because, so here's the thing, he figures that the word awesome is way overused. People just call everything awesome. I mean, that jump you did was awesome, and those shoes are awesome, and this streaming and the big screen back there is awesome, as if it's worthy of awe, worthy of worship. And he's like, no, the only thing worthy of awe and worship is God, actually. So only God is awesome. He'd say that all the time. He'd say awesome. He's like, no, only God's awesome. And I was too ignorant. I kept doing it, and he eventually gave up on me as a lost cause. But it's super true. Only God is awesome, and we're desperately looking for something awe-worthy, and that is actually the biggest market of the world. Every single company is trying to create something distracting and stimulating, exciting, and awe-worthy enough to fill our minds with. And they gave up with Legos and toys after we're like 12, 13 years old, and they start giving us ideas and movements to get behind. You can actually see really cool things where, like, car brands, and I'm a sucker for this too. Car brands went away from just their product to, like, if you're a Jeep owner, you are a Jeep owner. They create a culture, and a Dodge Ram has a culture about it, and they're trying to get you part of an idea. Subaru had a cool tagline that I frankly love. I love to have a Subaru, but Subaru owners already know. Like, you already know that it's the best thing ever. We don't have to tell you, because it's already know. Talk to a Subaru owner. But they're trying to fill us with ideas, and so then we cling on to those things because they're easier. They're easier than a difficult, real, two-way relationship with Jesus Christ in our life. It's easier to cling on to something that's literally being spoon-fed to us, and then they fill up into our minds and become idols. So, question for you guys to think on is, over this past year that has been stressful and wild and weird, and you've lost stuff and you've looked for things to cling on to, what have you turned to that's taken that space up in your mind at times? What's become an idolized idea in your mind this past year? Think about that. Because what I want to talk about this morning is not just to leave it there. This isn't just a guilting call-out session. We can actually do stuff about that, and it takes some work, it takes some effort. But I've got 3 R's, some R-based alliteration here. You can't just change your mind and stop thinking about something, because there is spiritual realities at work here. There is the devil who is loving the fact that we're filling our minds with anything but God, and he is working as hard as he can to keep that going. So it actually is going to take effortful work, a fight against that, to focus our minds back on God, to remove these other things. So the first one is remove. Not remove the stuff out of your life, actually remove yourself from the fuel for those idols in your life. If you have conversations with people that are just driving you up and getting you stoked, and masks this, and the government that, and the vaccines this, remove yourself out of that moment, because it's fueling this idea that is becoming your identity, becoming your peace, becoming the thing you worship in your life. Move yourself out of it. And the reason why that is important is because that stuff is never going to go away. Sinful, focused, like big distracting idols are never going to go away. They're always around. Actually, uproot yourself, take yourself out of it temporarily, though. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But you actually have to get yourself out of it. And a nice thing with, especially when we get a stay-at-home order, it's not actually that physical. It's something like turning off the TV or turning off the social media feed, putting your Facebook page on a suspension for a little bit, and start scheduling this stuff. I get that cold turkey is pretty difficult, so start scheduling things like, you know what, 7 o'clock news, going to watch the news from 7 to 8 and nowhere else. If somebody sends me a text, I'm like, you got to see that. Nope, I'll wait until 7, or I missed it. Like, that's fine. I'll check it the next day. Social media, same kind of deal. My big addiction that I kind of struggled with was this. I thought it was the dumbest thing ever, but Instagram came out with a feature called Reels, and it's just like scrolling through pretty much just constant show and tell of people doing amazing things, following different trends, and man, I get glued to that. And I started thinking, like, photography filled up my feed so much, and right away I was like, I'm the worst photographer ever because look at all this amazing stuff, and all of a sudden I lose 2 hours of just going through Instagram Reels. And I had to start literally scheduling myself that kind of time. And what is amazing is even the big companies know these dangers. This isn't just actually, it's rooted in biblical ideas. These 10 commandments aren't just arbitrary rules. God actually wants what's good for us. It's rooted in our DNA of knowing the truth as well. And so even Apple and Google and Android, all the different things actually have built into all of your phones, all of your devices, screen timers and app timers that you can turn on and you can set. And it'll pop up and say, hey, you've spent this much time here. And maybe don't do that. Or you can even say, like, lock this app after an hour per week, whatever it is. You can actually put these kind of things. So that's one way to remove yourself from that fuel is schedule stuff, put timers on things, limit your interaction with certain things. If it's people as well, and they're really important people, we don't want to actually just completely remove ourselves and hermit ourselves. Schedule it too. Say like, hey, you know what? Or in a controlled environment, like let's go out somewhere public, let's have a coffee like once a week maybe, right? I can't do this daily. I can't just keep getting fed by this stuff. Schedule it. But then the next part, and this is where we start doing some of the rebuild, is refuel. Fill your mind with something better. You can't just leave it void and empty. You have to fill it with something better. Humans by nature have addictive tendencies, and it's really difficult to leave an addiction without replacing it with something else. And that's why often, I mean, if you're a smoker, you get nicotine patches, so you can kind of get that next thing, whether it's chemical, whether it's mental, whatever it is. We're good at different fixations and just replacing it with something that's a little bit better, that's a little bit healthier, that's a little bit less damaging to ourselves or people around us. And that happens with ideas too. You can't just stop thinking about something and now it's fine, you have this empty void. It'll get filled really quickly, and if you don't fill it with something better, Colossians 3:2, set your mind on things above, heavenly things, on God. Literally crack open the Bible, start reading it, go through the Psalms, some actual examples of praise and worship of God, how he is, how you struggle with him when he doesn't follow through with the things that you really want, and you get those emotions out. But fill your mind with heavenly things, things from above. Refuel. And last, repurpose. I don't want this to be a sense of, it can be really easy, and there's different movements throughout history that have done this over and over again to just kind of shun everything bad and remove yourself from everything bad, and then you eventually just the old Mennonite style and get into the barn and don't go into the outside world because it's evil. You actually have to engage in the world around you. You have to engage in the work you're doing. It might be that you've been part of a work crew that's actually fueled some of the negative ideas. You might have been part of a club or whatever. You're on whatever the different work is. I didn't write down enough examples here on the notes. But you can't just remove yourself from everything and hide and hermit yourself. You need to enter back into that with a different focus. And it's not likely, like we rarely go into stuff with the intention of finding idols to consume our minds. They sneak in place. So actually what it is going to go back into our relationships, back into the family members' relationships that were maybe driving us into these kind of idol-focused ideas, going back into the workplace, going back into different groups or clubs and stuff like that with Jesus as the center and as a purpose, with the gospel as a center and purpose, because we also need to be a light in the world. And that's what it's actually going to take. You have to replace Jesus. You have to replace the idols with Jesus. And then we actually start fulfilling that commandment from the start. So it takes motivation. It also takes invitation. And this is where there's something really exciting about what Jesus offers us, is he is actually making the first move over and over and over again. Throughout the Gospels, read them. Every single interaction Jesus has with the disciples, he reaches out first. He makes the first call. When Peter loses faith, stumbles, and starts sinking in the water, Jesus reaches out his hand. There's a tax collector who just wants to get to know Jesus, and he's not able to, and he's kind of shunned by the culture, and Jesus says, like, hey, Zacchaeus, come on, man, like, come on down. He reaches out and makes the first move. So we have that first move invitation. We just have to respond to it. The whole idea of Jesus coming and being our Savior came out of God making the first move into our lives, because we couldn't do it on our own without that first move. It's the same way he called Moses to go first. God really offers us a Savior, and we can actually act on that. So it sounds simple in Sunday school that Jesus is the answer, but it actually is when the commandment says, only worship me, only focus on me, make your priority, make the quantity of what's going on in your mind and your life focused on me and on my guidance for you, on my kingdom. So the answer actually does become Jesus. I want to give a very real solution or example here too, which is exciting. There are also programs that do this because it takes ongoing work, and it's not going to happen just like that. You can't decide to change your mind. It actually takes regular routine. Starting up in a couple weeks here, we are hosting here at the church a program called Freedom Session, and it's focused exactly on this, how to remove pains from your life, things that have clung on through past trauma, through past incidents, things that you've just created as massive barriers and walls in your life you can't move past, and they've become literally idols in our life, and how to let Jesus come in and redeem that and change you. It happens at a number of different churches all throughout the valley. We're doing one here. It's a small kind of program, but if that doesn't work for you too, I really encourage you, if you've got stuff that like, I cannot move past this. I've tried, Grant, I get it. You're saying all this stuff and it makes sense. I'm sitting there nodding, but I cannot move past it. It takes some help. It takes support, and that's exactly what this program, Freedom Session, does for you. And we have a little video here that we're just going to play in a moment, and then we'll wrap up with some prayer and some dialogue, just kind of bringing this into our week and our daily life and going out from here too. Pastor Rob and I will chat about it, but just take a listen to a couple of these stories about why people jumped into Freedom Sessions, how it kind of changed them. I think there's a little tiny piece in there of what the program kind of even really looks like, just as an invitation, but there's a very real, tangible way to kind of act on this, to pursue better mental health, to bring the gospel into your life, to kind of replace these things that are just driving us down.
I came to Freedom Session because I had realized that there were deep childhood wounds that were affecting my current choices in my day-to-day life, and that had played out in the marriage breakdown that I was going through.
To say that I had walls was an understatement. I had built the biggest walls. I wasn't going to let anybody in.
And I was very upset at God. I felt like He'd let me down.
I had tried desperately to make my marriage work, and when it failed, I was angry at God, and so I did things that were unforgivable to me.
Different ways that kind of society told me how to deal with it, and I couldn't anymore. So I turned to church, and the first church service I ever went to, my church, Village Church, introduced Freedom Session. So I just totally felt called to sign up, and that's how I arrived at Freedom Session.
Yeah, I came to Freedom Session. I'd heard a lot about it. A lot of my friends have been going over the years.
I originally came to Freedom Session when I was 19, and I was a pretty new Christian. I had just accepted Jesus into my heart about a year before, and in my high school years, I struggled quite a bit with like drugs and alcohol and purity and things like that. And so now all of a sudden I was a Christian, and I kind of knew the rules, and so I knew that I wasn't supposed to be drinking and doing drugs anymore. And so trying to do life sober, a lot of stuff in my heart came up from my childhood and things like that.
We had tried for years to have a second child, and in the midst of that process, I'd had a miscarriage, and it was devastating to say the least. That alone threw me into a pretty dark time of depression.
The issues I was dealing with were most dominantly was sex and girls.
Last year, things in my life just started to fall apart, just come undone. I thought I was losing my mind, and then one week in church, an announcement was made that Freedom Session was coming.
I was at my lowest point. I was on a number of prescription medications for depression and anxiety, mood stabilizers, you name it, I was on it.
Through that time, I really struggled to connect with my husband, and there was so much angst and pain that it just caused us to really fight, and just brought us to a really, really low point in our relationship.
It kept getting worse. I remember coming home from work, and it was always, the conflict was there.
It took me 8 years to create what I thought was the perfect life, and it all came crashing down when I found out that my husband had been unfaithful in our marriage.
I always saw myself as a mistake. I always saw myself as a nuisance, and in the way that my opinion, my thoughts never mattered.
Well, welcome to Freedom Session. Hi, my name is Ken, and I am really looking forward to spending the next few months with you and sharing some of the insights and the exercises that will transform your lives and relationships.
Our Freedom Sessions, Amanda, you want to wave your hand over there, Amanda? She is the person to talk to about what we're doing here. Like I said, though, it's also a big thing. If it doesn't work for the one evening a week that we're choosing, the program is similar between church to church to church. It's just an amazing way to go. I know there's a few people here in the church who have done it as well. They'd have cool testimony of how it's impacted their lives too. So yeah.
So if that's something that you're interested in, please explore that. I couldn't help but think, thanks for that teaching this morning, detailed and helpful for me, that when I take my eyes off of Jesus, off of my relationship with him, that is more or less when I find myself in trouble. Is that true for you maybe as well? Like as simple as Jesus is the answer it still is the answer, as you said at the very end.
Yeah.
And what's very cool about that is when I do take it off, my attention, my eyes, my focus, my value, my worship, it's not like God says, oh, you dum-dum. He doesn't do that. We do not worship a condemning God. We worship a God who says, oh, I see. You've chosen that again. Let's talk about that. It's the Holy Spirit in us saying, oh, yeah, you could choose better, and we're in good terms because I've already forgiven you of these things. And then when we choose, and you know this, when we have our eyes focused on him and our values there, and we are worshiping him instead of all the other things we place in, like we'll name a couple shortly here, our lives just tend to go better, don't they? Don't they, right? So the question I think we want to handle firstly is, why do idols have come up into your mind this past year? Things that we've made idols by the amount of time we think about them, the priority give with them, the quantity, all that stuff,
Yeah. Well, I know specifically for me, just as an example, and it might be relatable, like the church has been, in amidst this pandemic, there's been every opinion and idea and decision made ever on every piece of the board, and then the news loves saying this and that, and it became for me a huge point of like one church would do this and then the news would talk all about it, and then another church would do this and the news would talk about it, and it became so frustrating to me, and I started getting really prideful and really like, well, my church is this and that church sucks and they don't know how to, and I just talked about that. It was like the only conversation I was having every single time, and it became like I'd talk to somebody else and like, oh, hey, how's it going? Church is really tough right now because this church just did, and it was crazy. So that became the most common thing that was happening in my mind, and it polluted it.
And we've talked about this before, so what can happen with your mental health is it goes peaks and troughs. It's like, as your mind shifts around what you're thinking and what you're talking about, it does that. When we talked about this previously, the idol that popped into my mind right away was my discretionary time. Through a year and a half of having time to myself, when I wanted, how I wanted it, that was a big deal. So now being asked to meet with people, go out, do these things, can you be involved in that? How do you want to participate in this? There's a fundraiser here, can you do that? It's like, oh, no, I don't want to. I've made an idol out of that time that I had a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
Do you think that's true? Do you think that's fair?
Totally. I remember when we were starting to talk about going back to Sunday mornings in service or in-person services on campus here, I thought, I've had Sundays off for a few months for the first time in my life of like the last decade. Yeah. And it was really nice. It was really nice sleeping in.
Yeah, it's been 27 years for me, so I get it, and more for others. But so question 2 then, if those are the idols that you and I might represent as maybe some of us struggling with them beyond what you've already said in your teaching.
Yeah, what's the first step you could take, like immediately? If you can identify based on those 3 things, quantity, priority, reaction, how you're doing that stuff, what can you do immediately to just start, like, you're not going to get to 100% completion, but like, what can you right away do?
Well, I love the 3 R's, by the way, the remove, refuel, repurpose. So as I think on those, for me, it is to repurpose my time, right? Repurpose that discretionary time. That, I mean, we can say we all intuitively know it's not healthy to isolate, but boy, it feels good, right? I'm going to binge watch this, or I'm going to read that book, or I'm just going to close it and shut down and shut off. It's so easy to go there, particularly in a cultural moment where our PHO is saying, you should stay home, right? So that's been tough.
Yeah.
So I think for me to repurpose it is, you just got to get out, fella, right?
Yeah.
And be active in other people's sort of lives and caring for them. I love the me wedge, because I think I could stay there, and that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And we have a therapeutic culture that says, well, you got to take care of yourself first before you can take care of anybody else. And you're like, oh, I'm so taking care of myself, right?
Yeah,
but you can't stay there because it's not healthy. It just isn't healthy.
So you're like scheduling against your kind of selfish time.
Yeah, exactly. How about you?
Call it that. Yeah, well, I know for that one specifically, it started becoming overwhelming. I had this conviction of like, man, that's all I'm talking about. I don't know if I heard the words from somebody else or is just God talking through somebody else to me. It's like, all you talk about is just your angst against church stuff going on constantly and church reactions. And I had to literally just start, like, that became a trigger for me that I just shut up. Like, I just stopped talking a lot of the times. That was a huge thing. I had this opinion. I wanted to say a thing and just shut up.
Well, good for you to hear it.
Yeah.
Right?
And it made a huge impact because as I stopped verbalizing things, I still had it in my head, but as I stopped speaking out of my mouth, it left my mind after a while.
Oh, it sounds like the Holy Spirit's self-control of you and helping you through that.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That's awesome, buddy. Thanks for sharing this morning.
Let's pray.
Why don't you do that?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Join me in some prayer. God, thank you for this morning. Thank you for gathering online and in person on campus here. God, I just pray that this message speaks to us truthfully, God, not in a convicting way, but in a way that we can just have more of you in our minds, in our lives, that our worship can be directed at you and not other things. God, thank you for what seems like plainly obvious commandments that are still so applicable to every single thing we do today. God, I pray for anyone here who's just thinking of what they can actually do. You give them clarity for the first step they can take to just start removing the negative burden of different weights, different things that their mind is just focused on. If they need that extra step too, God, a program like Freedom Sessions, give them the ability, if it's room in the schedule or if it's extra push or an invitation, God, to enter into a program like that, to just focus our minds, renew our minds on you. God, and for any of us here, give us the power to speak that truth into somebody's life close to us. If we need that extra thing, use us to be your words, like it's happened to me, God. I've experienced you speaking through people so often. If there's somebody here, God, who doesn't know you, I just pray that you give them the strength and desire to want to know you better. Come speak to any of the pastors here, myself, Pastor Doug, Pastor Rob. We would love to get more people to know who you are. But God, I just pray that you keep this message in our minds, that you bless us this week as we go out of here, that we can just be the church in the Fraser Valley here, God, in mission, wherever we're joining in from. We pray all these things in your name. Amen.